Well, I'll tell you what, man. After we did our Thomas Hobbes episode,
Yes.
I really felt like we made our masterpiece, but I'm certain today we're going to surpass ourselves in our conversation with René Guénon.
Further and higher as we go. Well, I think we're going to discuss today Abdul Wahid Yahya.
Well, that's his Arabic name,
That's his Arabic name.
because he spent a lot of time studying Eastern societies.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, René Guénon, who's a French writer, who's a French expert in anthropology, a historian,
A philosopher, a metaphysician, specifically.
of course,
Yes.
in secret knowledge. He's a big master in secret knowledge. So René Guénon is well known into the big literary,
In intellectual circles in France.
in
He's,
the, in
he's
the
well
big,
known.
in the big intellectual circles in France, but not much by the great public.
And it's a shame. It's a shame because even especially in his day, he exercised a lot of influence. He was one of the big guys. Today, though, he's not studied as much.
So why is René Guénon relevant nowadays? Well, most of his books are written in French. Actually, all of his books are written in French.
And there aren't many translations available.
Exactly.
But we have linked the best one in our description.
And so it's a pleasure to bring that knowledge into an Anglo-Saxon, if I might say, audience, into an English-speaking audience. So the specific thing about René Guénon is that, as we've said, he studied many philosophies, either Eastern, Western, or any of the human type truth and universal knowledge. René Guénon truly believed that knowledge and truth, as he would say, was not like we could consider it nowadays, my truth and your truth. So Nikita, what's the color of that wall?
Well, it's blue, I would say. It's a shade of blue, but
Yeah,
it's blue.
But for me, it's green, you see, it's my truth.
Yikes, that's complicated, no?
It is complicated, right?
But René Guénon doesn't believe in that.
No, René Guénon would say that that wall is blue, not because he can see it, but because it is just blue.
Because it adheres to a universal principle that is transcendent.
Completely.
It's beyond its physical nature.
And that's what René Guénon would argue would be the specificity of his work.
Yes.
There is one universal truth, and men in general, with the capital M, have discredited that universal truth. So let's begin. René Guénon's main ideology, his main philosophy would be that there is no ideology. There is only one single truth.
One universal truth which has been understood, interpreted by different cultures, different civilizations, whether it's Persian, Greek, Roman, Indian. Simply, it's been depicted with different motifs. The same truth is depicted across civilizations with different motifs.
You know, I would say that cultural values and transvaluations and ideologies are all saying the same thing in a different language for different people,
Voila.
for different geographies, for different climates. And that is what René Guénon would argue. Now, René Guénon is the man who predicted the end of the world. Well, that could sound dramatic.
And
Now,
it's like, why would we even take this guy seriously? Who is this intellectual talking about the end of the world? But there's a lot of veracity and a lot of wisdom. He more or less predicts the trend of the world in that post-20th century period, or at the beginning of the 20th century, specifically the interwar period, is when he was writing. And he foresees, let's say, the denouement of that bloody 20th century, because we think of the 20th century as being modern, advanced, proliferation of science and liberalism, democracy. The 20th century, let's not forget, it was the bloodiest century on the record.
so let's get some context.
Yeah.
René Guénon died in 1951.
51. Yes.
51. So René Guénon was witness to what? What was the context?
Well, he titles his book Crisis of the Modern World. The
Yes.
Crisis of the Modern World. And it's a very apt title because he witnessed crises of every nature and of every kind. Let's begin with the political and military crisis of his day, the First World War.
First World War, right?
That war which saw the collapse of the antique empires of Europe, the introduction into warfare of new technologies, of armies ever greater than before. It's called the Great War for a reason, and René Guénon witnessed that, right? The first crisis of his day.
Second of all, I would say an ecological war, right?
Right.
Because look at the ecological dilemma that he faced after the First World War. Look at the Industrial Revolution.
Hyper-industrial.
Right?
Yes.
Look at because there was an rural exodus. People
Yes.
used to flee the countryside to come to the city.
Uh-huh.
And he would even argue that the city is more and more eating the countryside.
Like a parasite on the country.
The
yes.
city isn't even more a basis for the sustenance of the countryside and its connection with the
Exactly.
outer world.
Yes.
But the city is now the main basis of the country, and the countryside is just the mean to feed the city, and not the opposite.
Right.
So
There's that ecological crisis with Guénon.
So ecological crisis with the Great War, and we have
An economic crisis.
Which is
the Great Depression.
1929.
Exactly.
So René Guénon, we could argue that, okay, listen, man, you've had crisis, you think it's the end of the world, but here we are, it's not, right? 50 years after, it's not. 100 years after, it's not.
In the 21st century? Yeah.
But we need to understand something. René Guénon is a man who believed that history isn't measured by 100 years or 200 years, but in terms of what he might call the ages, the yugas.
The cycles.
So, now, you might think that, oh, those guys are going to tell us about some spirituality they've just learned in a book. And you're completely correct. Completely correct. Well, René Guénon would argue that he noticed something by studying the different cultures and civilizations that either, let us remember, the goal of René Guénon is to find one universal truth that applies to every single and different civilization and cultures. And he noticed something by studying the Greeks, the Persians, the Indo-Europeans, and the Western civilizations, that there is one thing in common between them,
Yes.
which is a certain separation between the ages.
Exactly. In a cyclical fashion.
So we could call that, in terms of Indo-European culture, the yugas.
The yugas, yes.
Human beings operate just like the planets.
Exactly.
In cycles.
That's the basis of his metaphysics, right? Metaphysics is that branch of philosophy which seeks to deal with the nature of reality and truth, right? So his metaphysics is based on the cycles of nature, right? All of nature observes cycles, from the stars in the sky, the changing of the seasons, even hormonal cycles in individuals. Let's even consider the word year, right? It's not that men invented the year. The year is simply the word we have used to describe the rotation of the Earth around the sun. In French, we say année, and so we see the same root even with the French word circle. Année, anneau. It's a circle.
Anneau.
No, exactly. It's a cycle. So all of nature, from the stars in the sky, the changing of the seasons, the hormones of the body, follow a certain cycle.
It's cyclical.
Exactly. The ages and the histories, therefore, must follow the same, and we are deceived to think otherwise.
So René Guénon used to study something even bigger than history, which was the meaning of history. The meaning of history.
Who wrote that book?
Who wrote that book? Henry Kissinger.
When he was, how old? 20-something?
24?
Something like
I
that.
think it was his Harvard
Doctor, no, his undergraduate thesis.
master's
Thesis. In
Right?
fact, wasn't it so long that it caused Harvard to place a limitation on the page number of theses?
Wow, what can I tell you?
Something like that.
What can I tell you? Well, so Henry Kissinger wrote a book called The Meaning of History, where he analyzes the philosophical aspects of Kant, Toynbee, and Spengler, Oswald Spengler. And those three writers would analyze history not as just events, but as cycles. And they would try to understand the meaning behind those events, the cyclical events behind that. So René Guénon is inscribed into that same tradition of understanding the cycle of history and concluding a certain meaning behind it, which means, let's go back to that. He noticed that in every single and different culture, there is something similar, which is the understanding that history in general, is cyclical.
Yes.
How can we divide those cycles that are inherent in every single great civilization?
So there's 4 of them, right?
Yes.
And they occur throughout, we can imagine, the span of centuries. We're talking about a scale of
Not
centuries.
even. We're talking about one cycle is approximately 6,000 years.
There you go. But let's say in the modern age, we'll talk about the meaning of modernity, this cycle seems to become accelerated if we begin at the Renaissance. right?
Exactly.
The age of humanism.
But let's first understand the cycles.
And then we'll deal with that.
So
yes.
the Indo-Europeans used to call that the yugas.
So the ages are as follows. The first one is the Satya Yuga.
The second one would be the Tetra Yuga.
Yes. The next one is the Drapaya Yuga. And finally,
And the one we supposedly live in nowadays
According
is
to
the
Guénon.
end of the Kali Yuga.
there you go.
Now, I know,
Together, let's just finish this point together, all four of them represent what's called the Maya Yuga, which means the completion of this entire cycle of the yugas.
The achievement of the circle just as a year, as the Earth would rotate
Around the sun.
Around the sun, that's the completion of the cycle would be called a year. And in that scope of history, we would call that
A yuga.
a yuga. Right. So what would that mean? In each great civilization, you have the same concept in different words. We could even say that's like the mantra, strong men create...
There you go.
Strong men create good... Well, it's a simplified way of looking at it,
It's
right?
a cliche, but it's happened to be a very true cliche.
Correct.
You know?
So what is it? Hard times create strong men.
And then the strong men create good times.
Then the good times create...
weak men,
Then the weak men create.
bad times. And
And then again, the hard times create...
there you
Well,
go.
it's a cycle.
There you go.
Right? So you could say it's the same, right? And in the Greek, in the Indian, the Indo-European, and the Western civilizations, you have that cycle of history,
And they all understood it the same way, they just gave it different names.
which is the Bronze Age,
Gold Age,
the good times, Gold Age,
Gold Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. Iron Age, meaning like iron is the hardest of those metals, you get it? You know, gold is also the softest and the most valuable. So iron is like the Dark Age, like Kali Yuga.
Now, what's interesting in that is that they all were divided in a certain, like each cycle wasn't as big as the other.
There were proportions to it.
It was, I think, the age of the Iron Age. Now, first of all, the Golden Age was four
Portions.
portions.
Right.
Now,
Next, following the Silver Age
the
is
Silver Age is three portions.
Yep.
Now,
Following Bronze Age is 2 portions.
yes,
And then the Kali Yuga, the Gold Age, the final
the
age.
Iron Age, you mean,
Excuse me, yes. The Iron Age
is
the-
one portion.
is 1 portion.
So, what is interesting about that?
That's the Pythagorean number.
So, yeah, it's 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's a countdown, but it's also the corresponding proportions
Of the what?
it's of the Pythagorean number.
The detractus of
Detractus
Pythagoras.
in his academy, which a secret society amongst his peers where they used to exchange knowledge about geometry, about music, about proportions, harmony, symmetry, beauty, right? So the fact that the length of these proportions indicates to us that there's a certain mathematical truth behind that. Just as there's a mathematical truth to the rotation of the stars, right? The alignment of the stars. There was an eclipse recently, right? That represents a certain harmony. Because each planet, each celestial body is making a rotation
Yes.
around another celestial body, and in doing so, they create harmonies. Because that's what harmony, even in music, is. It's the proportions of 2 notes against each other.
So you mean that there's a famous image of Pythagoras with the detractus, right?
Yes.
An image of him holding like the triangle.
Yes.
So behind every symbol is an esoteric knowledge, is something to be understood behind it. But the only way to, I would say, to pass that knowledge through ages would be by symbolism,
Exactly.
right?
Symbols store the meaning.
It's a symbolism that would be passed down. It's the symbolism of universal truth.
There you go.
Correct? So René Guénon used to think that we live in a cyclical history, and for him it wasn't like his truth or my truth, it was just the truth.
And the fact that it's related to Pythagoras gives it some certain celestial and mathematical veracity as well.
So there is even a scientific truth
There you
behind
go.
it. So René Guénon used to believe that human beings, especially in the West, he really like, I've told you, he has an Arabic name. So he was really well known in the circles of Egyptology. Egyptology is a discipline that evolved since Napoleon, when Napoleon went with his army and
Exactly.
a bunch of scientists in Egypt.
And they excavated the pyramids, the Sphinx, yes.
That was the
birth of Egyptology.
that was the birth of Egyptology.
Of the European fascination with that civilization.
Exactly. So we would say René Guénon had a really renowned name in those circles of Egyptology. So he was a man who spent most of his life in the east of Europe, right? Mm-hmm. So he said that in the Western man has forgotten some universal truth that hasn't been forgotten in the East.
Exactly.
For example, he starts with, when was the beginning of that? The beginning of the end of the Western man's acquaintance with the eternal and universal truth.
Well, it would have been during the Renaissance,
Yes.
right?
Why?
Well, we saw the emergence of a new outlook on the universe, on the
Humanism.
world. Humanism. Yes.
What was humanism?
Humanism, there are many interpretations of humanism, whether you want to look at it through art history or political sociology or whatever, but ultimately it's the prevalence of man, of the individual, so it's a certain egocentrism. Ultimately, humanism is the triumph of man over nature, the attempt of man to put nature into his service. Now, isn't that narcissistic?
I think it is, because it means that man is the only measurement to which the world can operate.
There you go.
It means that, Nietzsche used to say that the Renaissance was something positive for humanity. Well, in terms of beauty and aesthetics, that could be true, right? Because if you...
And a certain reawakening of knowledge.
And especially Petrarch used to argue too that that's the reignitement of the Western Roman mind.
Yes.
Like they have been aware of what unites them, which is the Roman Empire.
The Hellenism, yes.
Right. Or pretty much the Romanism.
Yes.
Correct? But then René Guénon would argue that the Renaissance would be something quite devolving in terms of the evolution of man. It was a devolution of man. Why? Because men decided to take the world as being something that operates within the realm and the measurement of man himself. And René Guénon would argue that on the opposite, on the contrary, it is man that operates
within nature.
Within nature. Nature itself and the universal truth of nature is the realm in which man operates. Now, what happens with that? The Renaissance would be the beginning of humanism. And it would be the beginning of the decomposition of human beings from, I would say, as we saw in the Fustel de Coulanges video, from a state to a clan, to a family, into the individual.
Yes.
The individual is now the relevant factor in society.
It's the basic unit of the organization, of the
organization. We are making statues, not of battles, of groups, of kings and his armies, but of individuals.
Yes.
The David of Michelangelo is one man. Is one man. Is the glorification of a man.
A single man.
Not of an army, not of an event, not of a family. You see what I mean? Not of a country. So man has become the center of the universe. And why is that bad?
It represents a degradation of knowledge.
Why?
First of all, right? For Guénon, the crisis of the modern age is not a degradation of morality, as his fellow Frenchman Jean-Jacques Rousseau would say. For Rousseau, the problem was a degradation of morals. For René Guénon, it's a degradation of knowledge. Man being unable to elevate himself to knowledge has brought knowledge down to himself. Why is that? Well, we described earlier the prevalence of nature in the past. So man now views himself as being able to conquer nature. We have gone from what is metaphysical now to what is physical.
Completely.
Exactly.
And that is the point that René Guénon argues to. So the Iron Age would just bring back men to what is spiritual, to what is immaterial. Because in times of hardship, when man doesn't know what to do, when everything is out of control, men would beg the skies, the heavens, the immaterial, the spiritual force to get him out of here. And after that, after the storm comes the calm. And during the calm, man would thank the God, and slowly but surely, his materialistic life would get better and better. After each war, what happened after the Second World War?
Well, it was an emergence of a new period of peace.
There was the baby boom.
Yes, a population growth. Yes.
Right? There was the Marshall Plan in Europe. Everybody had, the economy was rising.
It was the Pax Americana, the triumphs of liberalism.
After every great war, there is, I would say, after the chaos, there is a resurgence in the economical factor. There is more wealth, there is more health, and people are more happy. And slowly but surely, they will forget the values that made them go through those dark period of the age, and they would focus themselves on the materialistic aspect of life. René Guénon argues that the more you go far from the immaterial aspect of life, the more you approach the material aspect of life, and the more you become individualistic.
There you go.
The more you become individualistic, the more you create resentment in society, the more you create isolation in society. And man becomes truly a wolf to men. as our dear friend
Thomas Hobbes would
would say.
Yes.
Now, the main purpose of having a society that is tied together, what ties together?
Well, the word religion literally means to tie together.
Religai.
But it doesn't have to be a religion. It has to be some type of common faith. It can be a civic faith.
A common faith.
Yes.
It ties people together, so man is not a wolf to men anymore.
Yes.
Right? So the more people become individualistic, the more people become materialistic, the more people focus on themselves.
The more they become vicious to each other.
And on the acquisition of material wealth. And discard the immaterial. And let us remember, the immaterial is what gave men the possibility to go through the Dark Ages.
There you go.
Well, they are simply approaching the Dark Ages. But that is not something you can control. That is simply the natural evolution of history. It's a cycle. Like you can't stop the earth of moving around the sun.
Exactly.
It's not something to be seen as good or bad.
Exactly.
It is just how it is.
Good.
And every great leader must know his position. Why did Kissinger give the decline of the West
to Richard Nixon?
Richard Nixon.
Well, look, it's because he wanted Nixon to understand where he was situated in history.
Exactly.
Exactly, right?
He wanted to help Nixon understand where he was on the evolution of the cycle of history.
There you go.
Exactly.
And what his role was. Somehow they were in a crisis phase, wouldn't you say? And I think it's worth looking into the meaning of that word crisis.
Yes.
Because of its relevance. René Guénon, as we pointed out, he endured many crises in his life, not personal crises, global crises of a grand scale. What does that word mean, crisis? It has a certain etymology. It has two meanings, both of which are relevant. The first one, it shares a root with what word? With critical.
Critical.
Right? And so in that sense, a crisis is a critical phase.
Friction.
Yes. It's exactly what you think it is, a disaster period, a catastrophe, whatever. And so because of that, we immediately associate a crisis as being something negative. We can think of an economic crisis, a political crisis, a constitutional crisis. But a crisis can be something positive, right?
You know why? René Guénon would look at a crisis as being the universal truth.
Revealing itself.
Providence, God, apocalypse. What's the meaning of apocalypse, Nikita?
It means revelation.
Revelation.
To reveal.
To reveal how it should be.
Exactly.
And a crisis for René Guénon, and let us remember that René Guénon, for him, his ideas isn't the ideas of René Guénon.
It's not his personal opinion.
It's just true.
Uh-huh.
It's just true. You can call it arrogant, whatever.
He's doing a geometry of history. That's what you can think of it as.
We're
yes.
just giving you what he thought. And what he thought for him wasn't what he thought. It was true for everyone, for you, for me, everyone. You can call it arrogant, whatever, we don't care. So, for René Guénon, an apocalypse was, as Nikita just said, a revelation. It was a revelation, it was...
Of truth, of universal truth, a return of those things which were abandoned throughout the course of the yugas, the Maya Yuga.
Exactly. It was what we could call, as Roosevelt used to call it, providence, as René Guénon calls it, universal truth, or as some might call it, God, realigning men with truth.
Right, readjusting them to the instruments of the... That's what you can think of the solar system and the rotation of the stars as being a very sophisticated watch, a very sophisticated dial that's determined by immense gravitational forces beyond your comprehension.
Let us say that man evolves like that. That is truth.
Yes.
That is man.
Exactly.
They must evolve like that
Together.
to higher up, right?
Yes.
But if man decides to go to the immaterial, what is materialism? It's the ground.
It's the ground.
It's what is material?
It's what's physical.
It's dirt.
It's what you can touch.
It's dirt, right? So you go down.
Yes.
How do you elevate yourself? What's up? What's up?
The heavens and the
what's
skies.
What's towards the skies, Nikita?
The heavens. God.
Yeah, what's towards the heavens? When you leave that material sphere, what is in space? Nothingness.
Abstraction.
Immaterialism.
Yes.
So men throughout history must elevate himself. We can, if you believe in Darwinism and the evolution of men, we could say that men couldn't even stand up before.
Exactly.
But then he faced towards the sky and he stood up. And man is elevating himself to the skies. How? That is the universal... Wow. That is the universal truth. And man must walk with the universal truth.
Yes, consider.
Adam must walk with God.
Exactly.
Again.
Man elevated himself from the bottom of the oceans. He became a crustacean. He became some type of sea mammal. He walked onto the shores. He climbed up the trees. And then he was unsatisfied and he built rocket ships.
Higher and higher.
Higher and higher.
Sexy and higher. Wow. So, man must walk with the truth.
Uh-huh.
Correct? The truth will always walk towards the skies, the
Exactly.
heavens. But man must follow up. Now, if
Exactly.
man decides, because of materialistic aspect, to go down, what happens?
Well, he distances himself from the truth.
So what does the truth do?
The truth enforces itself
It
against
comes
man.
back here
Yes.
and it grabs
It
man.
strikes you.
And that is friction.
Uh-huh.
And that is war.
That's
that is
apocalypse.
pain.
That's
That is-
apocalypse.
that is revelation.
Uh-huh.
No, man. You should walk with the truth. You should walk with universal truth. You should walk with the salon.
So let's return to that word crisis. We've got a great conjecture over there, but let's go back to that word crisis. We discussed its first meaning. It has the same root as the word critical, and therefore we imply something negative to it. But we know also that crisis can be a positive
They
thing.
came for you, Nikita. We're done.
Ha! They found the universal truth. They're here to seize it from us.
Let's go.
Protect the knowledge. Right? So, crisis can be something positive. Crisis, for Guénon, means the period of transformation. Right? You can think of, let's say, the transformation means a change from one period to the next. We can think of an adolescent crisis. I don't know about you, but when I was a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, I was a very angsty guy. I used to listen to symphonic music on full blast on my headphones to drown out my demons, you know? Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, a symphony about a poor butcher that travels to the New World and feels the anxiety of modernity.
Typical adolescence.
Typical adolescence,
Yes.
you know, you find outlets to express yourself. But the adolescent crisis is good, it's necessary.
What is it? What's adolescence? It's a transformation.
It's a crisis. It's a transformation from boyhood to manhood. It's useful and necessary because you emerge from that adolescent, you enter the adolescent crisis as a weak boy, irresponsible, uncommanding, whatever.
It's intense.
Exactly.
And what does intensity build?
Density.
Wow.
Whew. Like you put yourself under the bench or on the bench beneath the bar. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be density, right? There's going to be resistance, right? You're going to feel a certain crisis in your chest. Your chest is going to be burning. Your muscles are going to be sore. But afterwards, you're going to be bigger and stronger. And the next time, you can endure even more. So in that sense, a crisis can be something very useful.
In chaos lays
Opportunity.
completely.
Uh-huh.
So, as we've said, René Guénon argues that when he says, yes, the world is ending, don't be scared, the salon is here. It's all right. You can like that video. It won't end if you do. Well, René Guénon argues that the Western men, and when he talks about the Western men, he talks about the man who lives in capitalism, the man who works
Liberalism, democracy,
in the Industrial
exchanges his
Revolution.
time for money, and yes.
The man who abandoned, as Nietzsche would say, God is dead. And what Nietzsche meant, you can check our Nietzsche video, by God is dead, he didn't mean that God was dead. He meant that God is dead in the mind of people.
Exactly.
But God is still here. The universal truth is still here.
Look to the skies.
And now, what René Guénon would even argue is during the Renaissance, men thought that he could literally resurrect. He could literally resurrect. And who resurrects?
It's God.
Who's eternal?
God.
Right. So man placed himself
In the role of God.
And again, you need to understand, regardless of if René Guénon thinks that his ideas are the ideas of everyone, we don't necessarily agree with René Guénon or disagree with René Guénon. We agree with some, we disagree with others.
We're
But
simply his advocate here.
anyways, we're just telling you what he thinks. And what he thinks is what everybody should think, according to him, again.
According to him, yes.
So, René Guénon used to think that the period of the Renaissance was the beginning of the arrogance of men,
Exactly.
of the materialistic aspect of men,
Of his attempt to overcome nature.
of the explosion of passions of men, because you need to understand that during the Middle Ages, the passions of men used to be restrained by the church.
Exactly.
So the Renaissance for René Guénon was just the beginning of what would become the sexual revolution nowadays. In May 68, for example, in Europe. So that explosion of passion, that untamed
Release of hormones.
that untamed release of passions, and uncontrolled sometimes, was for René Guénon the beginning of the end, the Kali Yuga, when all exterminated, we could call that, were all extinguished social structures, meaning nations, states, civilizations, families, were reduced to an individual. Because in most Western countries now, what is the measurement of the political entity in society. It's the individual.
So let's return quickly to Nietzsche. Nietzsche says God is dead and we have killed him. So, of course, God is not actually dead. We've simply replaced him because God represented, as we pointed out, a universal truth, right?
And that God was dead in the mind of the people.
Exactly. And what had replaced him? It was science. It was the advance of technology. And science is, like I said, humanity.
And it's materialistic.
Exactly. Humanism is man's attempt to overcome nature. And the way that he does it was with the scientific method.
And what does René Guénon argue? Sorry to interrupt you, a quick point. René Guénon would say that science is a way to understand what is material. But for René Guénon, for example, can you quantify the number of times Nikita wore a beautiful tie? Of course you can. Now, can you quantify Nikita's elegance, charm, and charisma? You cannot.
There's no scale for that.
There is no scale for it.
There's no measurement.
We know it's infinite. We know it.
So even if we could invent a scale, it wouldn't be appropriate.
So there are some things that you cannot even quantify. And René Guénon really makes a big point on that. He believes that we live in the age of quantity against quality.
There you go. That's especially the case with the Industrial Revolution, where you have let's say, the Ford Model T assembly line, the transition of cottage industries into mass-produced industries, resulting in the migration of people from the country to
We've seen the Charlie Chaplin movie, right?
Modern Times. It's
Modern
actually
Times.
called Modern Times, yes.
Voila.
There you go. And there's a scene in there where he gets crushed up beneath, he enters the machine accidentally, and he gets crushed up between the gears, and it's literally modernity now crushing man, exerting man. Or it's modernity exerting itself against man. There you go.
It's man working for the machine now, and not the machine working for man. And at the end, it's very symbolic. You see Charlie Chaplin getting crushed by the machine, meaning the machine is going to destroy man and replace him. And can we see that nowadays? Returning to Kissinger, what was one of the last books he wrote?
It was right before his death. He wrote On AI.
On AI, artificial intelligence. But let's be honest, what artificial intelligence could replace the Salon circle of thought and train of?
And its dear followers and subscribers and friends.
Who knows? We might be AI. Like, yes, Nikita, a machine, an artificial machine,
And Carl the same.
could create something beautiful as that.
Unbelievable.
It might be possible. But I truly believe personally that that is God's bid. Don't start blushing.
Don't make me blush.
Oh, Nikki. Well,
So,
listen, this is supposed to be a place of
the exchange of
academia.
knowledge. The exchange
Academia.
of knowledge.
Let's stop flirting with each other, Nikita.
Like, let's leave that for the bar, okay?
You mean the lifting bar?
The gym, yes, exactly. The barbell. The barbell.
Nice.
Okay. So, technology. We are beginning to see a mounting deficit in man's technological advancement and his moral advancement. Like you were saying, the truth has been moved from man's position because we've made truth material. We've made truth to be scientific. In fact, truth has not moved. We simply brought ourselves down to the ground towards what is material. And we've done this by the use of technology.
So if science replaced spirituality, religion, you call it as you wish.
Yes.
So what is science? It's the study of the evolution of what is material.
Oh, there you go.
But what about what is immaterial? How do you study what is immaterial?
You can't put it into quantities. You can't measure it with machines.
You can count the number of ties Nikita had. Well, I can't. I don't know enough numbers, but maybe you can.
Honestly, not even I know.
Well, but can you quantify Nikita's charisma and charm in terms of quantity? You can't. You see?
The scientist and the psychologist will say, oh, it's hormones and electrical signals. But it's just them attempting to materialize it.
So emotions and feelings are unquantifiable.
There you go.
So it's immaterial.
There you go.
So science...
Because you cannot actually measure the quality of the thought. So even let's say you measure the electrons and stuff in my mind, you can put a quantity to it, but not the quality to it. So you cannot measure its quality.
So again, feelings and emotions are unquantifiable, and that is what science disregards. Science disregards what is immaterial, but what is immaterial still exists. Because, listen...
And you should not deny it.
Listen, what can you see in your mind right now? Think about it.
What can I see?
Yeah, what can you see right now? Think about it.
My eyes can't perceive it. It can't be perceived by my senses.
What can you see? You have a vision in your mind. What can you see?
I see the glory of the salon. I see
Yes.
the education of our viewers. I see the creation of a great community.
Does it exist?
In my mind, it does.
Wait, so does it exist in the material world?
Not yet.
But so does it exist or not?
Presently, no.
But wait, if it exists in your mind, so it exists. In your mind, it exists. So in the immaterial world, it exists.
In the immaterial world, yes.
Correct. So science disregards that whole immaterial world. So maybe there's a certain failing in science to give us the universal truth. Correct?
There you go.
So the glory of the salon might not be scientific, but it surely is immaterial and aligned with the universal truth. No? Nice. Salon.
So what has been the driving force in this period of humanism? It's the perfectibility of man. It's man's attempt to overcome nature. But the main idea behind all of this is the idea of progress. Now, Kant would put that to pen and paper in his extensive philosophy. That's a topic for another time. But progress essentially means that today is better than yesterday. How do we measure progress?
Well, let me think. Would the Roman or the Greek suffer from not having a Wi-Fi connection?
Did Casanova suffer from not having Tinder?
Casanova was Tinder himself.
There you go, right?
But still, how could he suffer from not having something if creating something creates automatically needs?
Exactly. Like we, of the current time, of the contemporary time, we do not suffer from things which have not yet been created.
Correct.
Right? So progress, therefore, what it does is it creates demands for things that are not yet created. Progress is... the modern mind is the mind which looks at the ancient Greeks and thinks, oh, they're not older than us. Those are actually the younger humans.
Wait a second.
What are the older humans?
So in our own scale of understanding progress, right, is something good.
Well, yes.
But is it true by creating something new, you create more needs?
There you go.
So human beings now have more needs than before.
There you go.
So is that good or bad?
Well, what has really progressed? People will say electricity and water and plumbing and so on. And let's not lie to ourselves. Progress has offered us a lot that is very, very nice. But it is a material progress. What has resulted in the age of humanism, in the age of the scientific method of the Industrial Revolution, is a material progress.
For example, are we more into solidarity towards each other? Are we more happy with each other? Are our relationships better than they were in times of hardships?
Well,
because let's be honest, many people say that in war you see the worst and the best of men. So imagine going through hardships with a great friend. You would create a certain bond that is immaterial, and human relationships would be even more developed in other times.
Yes.
But nowadays, in those individualistic world, do we feel that we have more belonging
to each other? Yeah, so there's clearly been a material progress, but has there been a human and a moral progress to catch up with it? Let's, because we're talking about materialism, let's use materialism to measure it.
Yeah.
The rates of suicide is at all-time high. The rate of loneliness is at an all-time high.
Yes.
The Western world is the only civilization ever where you are more likely to die of obesity than you are of starvation. These are the consequences of materialism. So are we really happy? Has modernity and has progress fulfilled every promise which it has offered to us? A promise of continual improvement. Or have we been lied to? It is as though progress has been lying to us, and now that truth is being revealed to us again. The apocalypse is as though a lie is being revealed, and we are beginning to see the cracks in the facade of its verity.
Wait a second. Which country has the highest GDP per capita?
I would say it's Sweden, isn't it?
Right? It's the Nordic countries.
Exactly. They have their big oil fund, and
But still, right, they have like a state-run...
oil fund, yes.
Oil fund, right? Mm-hmm. And investment funds that is run by the state.
Through the state, yes.
Right? Now, which countries or set of countries have the highest rate of suicides?
I don't know.
Search it up.
It would have to be some country where the material needs are not being met.
It is the Nordic countries.
Oh, really?
The Nordic countries, despite them having the highest GDP per capita,
despite meeting the material demands and exceeding them,
they have, or maybe because of it, right? They have the highest rate of suicides. Interesting. You can search it up.
So then, perhaps the modern man is mistaken to equate GDP per capita with happiness, to use GDP per capita as the measurement of human fulfillment. Perhaps that is a mistake then. Perhaps the advancement of a civilization is not the height of its buildings, but the height of their man's souls towards the heavens.
Un homme ne se mesure pas de la tête aux pieds.
Mais de sa tête au ciel.
A man doesn't measure itself from his head to toe.
But from his head to the heavens.
Who said that?
That was Napoleon Bonaparte lui-même, himself.
Bonaparte. Wow.
Legendary.
And now it's us who say that.
Legendary.
Interesting.
Legendary.
Why not?
And then there's that word modernity. You'll notice there's a lot of etymology. Like, to get this stuff down, you need to know the meanings of a lot of words. Not just their meanings, but the meaning of the meaning. What is the etymology of the word modernity? And René Guénon would have us believe that modernity is a very destructive idea. It comes from the French word mode. Mode, which means fashion.
Trend.
Like, exactly, like the magazine de mode. So modernity is simply the trend. Modernity is simply that which is relevant, trendy, stylish.
And what is trendy?
Trend, whatever.
What is common?
Exactly.
But wait a second. Wait a second. What is heavenly must come from the top. What is heavenly must come from above.
Exactly.
And in terms of social structures, where does...
Like a social stratification, yes.
Right? Where does the great ideas of the heavens come from? In terms of social structures? From the elite.
There you go.
Nowadays, for example, let's imagine, with no disrespect to anyone, but what do people listen to, for example? Let's be honest.
The music, it's popular music with...
right, what's popular nowadays in Western society?
Well, the themes of it are rather vulgar.
Vulgar, right? Materialistic.
Even the harmony of it is not sophisticated.
It's promiscuous.
There you go.
Right?
It's yeah.
Like all of those rap songs, like we sometimes listen to rap.
And let's not lie, we enjoy dancing to it at the club once in a while.
Especially Nikita, huh?
Yeah.
All right. With women not his age, right? I mean older. Right? Now, wait a second. So, today's trend, even amongst the elite, is what is common. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. How many LA matcha avocado toast girls you see listening to some rapper talking about promiscuity and owning
acquisition of wealth and banging guns
in
and
a
so
vulgar
on.
way.
Exactly.
In a vulgar way. Mm-hmm. How many?
I lost count. I was never even counting to begin with, to be honest, because it wouldn't be worthwhile.
So, our main point is to tell you that what was common at the time, what was meaning in the common, what was trending amongst the common people has become common amongst the elite. Mm-hmm. So the elites, and René Guénon would argue that, as would Spengler, that would be for another video, Western civilization has lost touch with their elites. The elites in Western civilization have been common. Mm-hmm. They have become common.
Well, okay, yes, those landed aristocrats, the noble antique aristocrats, have been displaced by an aristocracy of consumerism and industry.
Now, we need to understand what is the etymology of aristocrat.
Arete, aristos, which means excellence.
So we need to understand what we mean by aristocrats is the best elements in society.
Exactly, the most talented, most capable, the people that you would rely on in a time of crisis.
How do you measure now somebody who's great in society?
With the amount of followers they have, with their net worth, with their...
Right, it's all materialistic.
Exactly, it's all quantifiable.
Exactly. But before, who were the best in society? The valorous, the chivalrous.
The one with the greatest virtue.
The courageous. Can you even count, can you even quantify courage or valor?
No,
those are unquantifiable things.
There you go. And look at the effect that this has had on warfare. It used to be the case... it used to be the case that the defeat of a nation simply meant the defeat of its warrior class, of its elite, of its aristocracy. But then, with this emphasis on humanism, which gave rise to liberalism, and therefore the idea of popular sovereignty, it therefore meant that the state was not its elites, the state was its entire citizenry. And that meant you could send your entire citizenry to war. You could perform a levée en masse, a conscription.
Yes.
And therefore the wars of kings were over, and the wars of men, the wars of common men, had begun. and you could fling the entire mass of one nation towards the entire mass of one nation, and the line between combatant and civilian is eroded, and everyone can become a target in the modern age.
It's not Achilles against Hector
Exactly.
anymore.
And it's not
it's
based
the phalanxes.
Exactly. It's not based on principles of honor, chivalry, because they are warriors and they have a certain arrogance, but more important is they had a certain ethos. Rather than institutions, they had values which guided their conduct.
Exactly. Like the samurai used to have the bushido. It's like a code of conduct, right? The knights, for example, when they became knights, the king used to come and slap them, say, let that be the last slap you would receive with no response. For example. So nowadays, the elite in society are the people in whom you can quantify what they possess. But back in the days, the elites were the people who displayed certain traits and characters,
certain virtues and values
that were completely unquantifiable,
Exactly.
like valor, courage, courtesy.
honor. Yes, there you go.
Can you quantify honor? You cannot. So science has disregarded what is unquantifiable.
And look at what the...
And therefore disregarded science. Sorry to cut you.
Yeah. And therefore, look at what modernity has done. That's why the 20th century is that kind of Kali Yuga period, right? That's why it was the most bloody century in history. So you combine the idea of the conscription, the army versus the army, right? And then you combine it with technology. We are in an age where the machines of warfare have become perfected, right? Look at what has become perfected. The devices with which men kill other men. Isn't that a shame?
Well,
you know, the invention of the Gatling gun, the guy that invented the Gatling gun, you know what his intention was? His intention was actually to save lives. Think about, and he did it in a very, his thinking was very material.
Just like the Nobel Prize.
The namesake of the Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize, right, was a way for him to remediate what
Had done.
The destruction he did.
He invented dynamite.
The Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly.
You see, like,
It's named after the guy that invented dynamite.
right? And it's quite strange, huh?
Yeah.
For example, imagine you would invent the Oppenheimer Peace Prize. Correct? Wow. Now, what you were saying was very interesting as usual. And I wanted to make a point, which was you look incredibly handsome today.
I'll say the same for you.
Thank you very much. So, second of all, you know that whole literacy during wars, usually during wars you have great paintings of...
Yes, it's a great artistic output.
Men
Yes.
on horses,
Yes.
and it's like
There was-
romanticized.
Romanticism literally was a reaction to the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution.
Exactly, that's my point.
Yes.
So, during the First World War, you had that whole series of painting, for example,
The surrealism.
Le Soldat et la Mort. You have that painting of like a skeleton,
Yes.
no, of a man holding like a rifle and a skeleton helping him to aim. Like death guiding the soldier. But before, you had Joachim Murat, for example, beautiful on his horse
Or you
and
had-
looking flamboyant.
Or
Like,
you had even the picture of Marianne in the French Revolution.
Correct.
Rather than a dead holding the arms, it's
you saw light.
it's a principle, it's a value.
Right.
Yes.
You saw lights so plumbing death and destruction.
There you go.
So you could even say that the glorious knight who was on his horse, for example, during the Napoleonic War, most of Napoleon's officers used to ride with no saddles. Why? Because, first of all, they were studs, most of them. Second of all, because they wanted to emulate the Greeks. The Greeks
There you
used
go.
to ride with no saddles.
There you go.
But nowadays, like, the soldier has been downgraded to being in a ditch, in a trench, in the mud, in materialism,
The soldier is a statistic now.
right? Before you've had names who
Yes.
used to do wars. Now you have numbers.
Exactly.
How can you quantify a name? A name is unquantifiable,
Mm-hmm.
but you can quantify numbers. You can quantify
That's casualties.
casualties,
That's
right?
that's what modernity has done to the modern man.
Correct?
There you go.
Very interesting.
There you go.
Maybe we should leave a beautiful link with a beautiful book where
Yeah.
people might learn
Yeah.
more than what we've learned from René Guénon.
Exactly. This was our attempt at summarizing and making a brief conjecture. But I said earlier an idea that's kind of stuck with me. Guénon gives the geometry of history. You know, Kissinger gives the meaning of history. Guénon gives a geometry of history. He's Pythagoras looking at history. He is at that period of Kali Yuga. He is witnessing or he's foreseeing the apocalypse. living in the midst of many, many crises of all dimensions. And from it, he produces this novel, groundbreaking work. It's a shame it's not studied, but it's a pleasure for us to bring it to you.
Why? Because our pleasure
Is your treasure.
vos plaisirs.
Sont nos désirs.
And on that, I would say, voila, my friend.
Voilà qui je suis, mais voilà même ici, mes années c'est fini, c'est le gosse, c'est mon Dieu.